Ironic, isn't it? How worlds that are so dead make us feel so alive. Games where entire ecosystems have collapsed, where cities have eroded, or nature has reclaimed its rightful throne. I love worlds like these because they speak to a hidden part within all of us that beckons for more. For stories about the collapse of society as we know it, and tales of how it all came to be. Settings like these have always fascinated me to the core. The haunting stillness in the air, no birds chirping, no cars honking, and almost no other human beings around. So today, I want to go on a journey through some of these breathtaking worlds, the ones that enrapture us, that take us on a journey through forgotten kingdoms, ancient mysteries, and dying ecosystems. And along the way, delve into the human condition, about why places like these inspire us to such a degree, accompanied by the philosophy and themes that make us think about them long afterwards. Here is the beautiful horror of games with dying worlds. Exo One is a game I've heard almost no one talk about, and that's because it's one of the most basic titles out there. Similar to experiences like Journey, the gameplay on offer is nothing more than simply moving your character, in this case a spaceship, around the environment and looking at things. But within this simple setup is one of the most powerful, beautiful, and haunting rides out there. In the game's lore, years ago, a NASA mission to Jupiter was launched in the hopes of finding truly special discoveries. But when the astronauts aboard the spacecraft known as the Jupiter Flyer arrived, something horrible happened. The crew could be heard on intercoms complaining about a strange voice and sound, after which a fire breaks out and the intercoms cut. Clara, the wife of the main character, is lost, and without explanation, the protagonist, who at the time is aboard a monitoring vessel watching the Jupiter Flyer above the planet, finds themselves back on Earth, now with a message from aliens to build a special craft which will take you through the stars. So for the next 2 hours, you do just that, flying from one planet to the next, all for some unexplained reason. And this is where the magic happens. Each and every planet you travel to in between is barren, dead, and desolate, devoid of life or any meaning at all. Massive mountains paint the sky with colors that bleed emotion and pain at every step. Text will flash on screen at times as we get a glimpse of what looks to be long-lost civilizations, or hints that these dead worlds may not have always been that way. And on each of these planets, there's almost a calming sense to it all, as usually the only sounds you can hear are the rushing wind as you fly across the ground at hundreds of miles an hour, or the faint pitter-patter of rain as it cascades down from the sky. Oftentimes during your travels as well, you will find massive structures that are metallic and foreboding, but obviously no longer in use. Clearly the aliens who have beckoned us on this journey are trying to tell us something, but it's never quite clear what that something is. All we have to go off of are these worlds, so infertile, so sterile. And these worlds only become more and more horrifying as we explore them deeply. Seeing so many massive and strange structures now covered completely in sand and dirt, or contraptions that have been overtaken by the cruelness of the elements is heartbreaking, yet exciting at the same time. A truly horrific event happened in all of these places that presumably left entire ecosystems and civilizations dormant and forgotten hundreds of years later. But what exactly caused all of this? What could possibly have led to so much death and destruction on not one, but many planets? Well, we never get our answers. It's left completely open-ended, and in the void, instead, our curiosity is filled with the evocative imagery and sensory overload of these environments, along with some truly breathtaking sequences traveling through the stars, being put face to face with the grandness of our own existence, or short memories of the life that we once lived, set to the backdrop of introspective and contemplative music. And to me, Exo One is a perfect example of what makes dying worlds and games so special. Those feelings you get taking your time through each location and just soaking it all in. How the hairs on your arms stand up when you hear the eerie music crescendo as you plunge deep underwater, or the countless questions that pop into your head as you play. Dying worlds in games are a perfect playground for exploration like this, where half the fun is the experience itself and how it makes us think about what happened in the past, how things got to this point, and whether or not it's all an analogy for our surely doomed future or an optimistic warning from aliens not to make the same mistakes. Sometimes less is actually more. And in the case of games with dying and forgotten worlds, often it's the things we never get to learn or the lessons never said aloud that stick with us the most. The beauty of simply looking out into a vast ocean that once held life and being taken aback by the wonder of it all. Or drifting through the clouds of a planet now composed of nothing but noxious gas and wishing things could go back to a simpler time that presumably held so much life. For a lot of people, they play games to have fun or shoot things, but sometimes we all just need an experience more intimate with nature itself, with both its beauty and horrors alike on full display that takes us on a journey through our own minds. For any of you who have ever watched the Alien series, you know one of the best and also most horrifying things about each movie is the art and design. Screaming baby aliens bursting out of chests, massive and ancient mechanical structures that drone on for miles, or slimy and disgusting tentacles and gaping holes that dot the landscape. Each and every scene in an Alien movie is so atmospheric because of what you see on screen in front of you at any given moment, always so enticing and unique. And in terms of games that manage to capture this same H.R. Giger-inspired aesthetic, full of dying worlds and forgotten civilizations, now taken over by the grotesque and horrifying nature of alien biomechanics, none do it better than Scorn. Taking place on a labyrinthian planet that has been stripped of almost all life, in Scorn you must slowly put the pieces together as to what happened in this strange place. From the moment the game begins, you awaken a body that almost feels like a husk, stripped of so much blood and flesh, trapped inside a bizarre room full of what seems to be skin-like substances on all the walls, accompanied by jagged mechanical design. You wander aimlessly for a time, after which you find contraptions with large maws and orifices which you must stick your limbs into, which implant abnormal enhancements onto your body. And really, everything around you feels sick, dying, or already dead. In many moments you will find what look to be statues or frozen creatures that are over 9 feet tall, oftentimes in sexual positions being mounted by other monstrosities or stuck in scenes of their bodies being torn apart by large mechanical chairs. And as you make your way further and further into the game, things only get stranger, with multiple moments where you must watch as your body is subjected to unspeakable horrors or uncover heinous secrets of the past. But maybe even more haunting than all of this is the implications in the world around you. You see, as you travel through Scorn from one room to the next, you are constantly greeted by visions of the past as you look into large megastructures and domes that carry on forever. Something horrible happened on this planet, and it's clear that where you stand now used to be what could have been a great civilization that before built so many contraptions and powerful technologies for some unknown reason. And even more abnormal is all of the imagery you see in the statues, or these ancient beings supposedly merging with life itself, man and machine, into creatures that are beyond explanation. It makes you wonder about what life must have been like for these alien monsters, what this experimentation must have been for, and what their customs and society were. And this intrigue only grows the further you get into the game, as you are met with scenes full of dead bodies littering the ground, open valleys of red mist and death, or even sadistic depictions of assault and a concerning focus on pregnancy and mutilation. I truly can't express enough just how much Scorn really nails these feelings, putting you on the edge every single moment you play and are walking through the game. Even with gameplay and mechanics that I personally find mind-numbingly boring, the experience of it all is something you really have to play for yourself to understand. Puzzles are boring, combat is basic, and dialogue is non-existent. And yet, despite all of that, the intrigue and horror of this dying world easily sucks you in, even if only for a short time, and forces you to just sit in your thoughts, staring into dark rooms full of unrecognizable sounds and imagery that will give you nightmares. And for me, this is what games with dying and forgotten worlds are all about. Those tantalizing moments that inspire so much fear, but also a desire to know more. After all, dying worlds by their very nature are scary because they remind us of our own fickle nature. That at any moment, everything we have made, all of our achievements, whether that be at a personal level or a societal and civilizational one, can disappear and be forgotten to the winds of time. And traversing through the lost civilization in Scorn is only heightened by the absolutely stunning design everywhere you look, that once again reminds us how even the mighty can fall. Human beings by their very nature are inconstant, frequently changing behaviors or feelings with time, and because of this, dying and forgotten worlds are a reminder to us all that we must remain steadfast in our survival instincts lest we perish. And what sort of thing could trigger that animalistic instinct in all of us better than seeing and reliving ruined worlds for ourselves? Maybe that's what makes these kind of places so fascinating in the first place. It feels like there's no shortage of puzzle games with wacky or mind-bending worlds, places that heighten the senses or strangle our minds with endless things to solve. I'm personally a big fan of a lot of these, like The Witness or the Talos Principle, but there is one puzzle game, Naissancee, whose world is unlike anything else out there. Taking place in an intricate and complex gray city of endless nothingness and inspired by the brutalist architecture of our real world, the place we run around in Naissancee instantly is gripping. The lack of color instead substituted for darkness and depressing grays harkens back to visions of the Soviet era. And behind this facade too is a world completely composed of death and decay. There are no other people around you, no voices, no sounds, just you, alone in this megastructure of sorts that for as far as the eye can see in each direction is nothing but the same boring and bland buildings. But as you explore more and start to uncover the secrets of this strange place, you find what look to be living quarters or housing units now abandoned. And behind every corner is a steep staircase or meandering hallway that leads to yet another discovery, all of which imply that this location was once so much more. And at one point, you discover that this place has a mind of its own, as lights flash before your eyes or structures start to move around you, opening up new paths to progress forward. So despite you being the only person alive that you have seen, the world itself has a mind of its own as well. And more than anything, just walking around the world of Naissancee is an experience in itself. What happened in this foreboding hellscape? Where is everyone? After all, it's clear that there must have been some people or something moving between these halls at some point. And these questions only become weirder and weirder when you realize that the entire world is collapsing on itself, where you can look either to the sky or ground and see nothing but reflections of familiar sights. The fairways between buildings are massive and hulking, but inside are small and brutish. So what sorts of creatures could possibly have lived in a world such as this? And even more interestingly, why? Why are the colors gone? Why do they reappear at later portions of the game in new locations and set pieces unlike anything else seen before? It seems clear that something horrible has happened and left an entire civilization, architecture 10 times the greatness of even the pyramids, now forgotten and lost. And on top of that, where even are we? An underground lair? A massive skyscraper? Or a place in time? These are the sorts of questions that all dying and forgotten worlds and games cast upon us, but few capture the raw emotions and feelings of it all as well as Naissancee. A game that with so few words or even understanding speaks deeply to all of us. And maybe that's my single favorite part of game worlds like these. They really get you in a contemplative and somber mood, the perfect experience to have on a cold night around the campfire. Experiences where you can't help but shake the feeling that something is watching you, that there's more going on than meets the eye, or that figuring out why this world has died is key to understanding the biggest secrets of the universe. Worlds like the one in Naissancee have a special way of making big and grand spaces feel so small and claustrophobic, and what a special type of world that is. Death Stranding has to be one of the most divisive games I've ever played. It feels like you either love it passionately or hate it vehemently, but for me, I without a doubt fall into the former camp. And that's because maybe more than any other games out there, Death Stranding really focuses on the world. No matter where you are in the story, if you simply stand and look around, you will be met with awe-inspiring vistas that meander on for miles. Mountains close and far in the distance, clouds that fill the air, and a distinct lack of plant life outside of moss hanging on for dear life. Each and every one of these environments is characterized by a distinct lack of movement and stillness, an earth that feels like it is being birthed anew. And also, when walking through each of these environments, we are given a chance to, well, just walk around. As a courier in this now apocalyptic future United States, something very terrible has happened, leaving most of the known world in ruins, surrounded by nothing but death. And it's your job to deliver materials and information from one place to the next, all while trying to stay alive from invisible and sadistic monstrosities that pull helpless people into the air or tear them limb from limb, transforming them into agents of pure chaos. It's a game world that has no lack of horrifying themes, and yet at the same time manages to be so beautiful in so many moments. I mean, seriously, look at some of the vistas you approach here. These views combined with almost transcendental music at times will have you doing nothing more than putting the controller down and soaking in all the world. The death, the decay, the silence. How did it all really come to be? It taps into that fear of the unknown within all of us, that yearns to know all the answers, to feel at peace in the tragedy of loss. And that's all from nothing more than the ambiance each scene is overflowing with. Sometimes dying and forgotten worlds don't have to be ugly or disgusting. They can be beautiful in their own way too. But maybe the most single haunting part about this setting is nature itself. Most obviously, the rain. You see, in Death Stranding, rain and thunder are more than just weather that passes with time. Instead, they are time itself. Known as timefall to the inhabitants of this barren and desolate United States, rain quite literally accelerates time for anything it comes into contact with. Meaning even getting a drop of rain from the sky in your skin can see you aging forward years and seconds. Birds fall from the sky in an instant, ecosystems crumble under the weight of molecules of death, and mountain ranges are stripped of any plant life that cannot grow back within days. And yet, despite all the troubles this hellish landscape is now subject to, for all the pain that has been wrought, there is still an underlying beauty behind it all. Of slowly making your way over the ridge of a massive mountain, only to be met with a setting sun and a sea and mountain ranges stretching on for miles, as the slow hymn of music fills the scene. That's what makes Death Stranding special, and by extension is a perfect example of why I personally love ruined and forgotten worlds in games. They simply give us feelings like nothing else out there, saying so much with so little, and there really is an evocative tenderness behind that, where it almost feels like you are being caressed like a baby, carried through the most horrifying things imaginable, yet still cozy in your blanket of warmth. Beautiful environments, mired by utter tragedy and dread, wondering how it all came to be, which awakens that sense of adventure within all of us to explore the long-forgotten lore of things that no longer exist, stumbling upon entire cities that now lie barren against the backdrop of a world forming once again. Sometimes games don't have to be purely about gameplay or narrative. Sometimes they can live and die off nothing more than a vibe. And almost no world captures this vibe better than the broken United States we see in Death Stranding, full of meandering valleys and an overwhelming sense of hopelessness that somehow still inspires us. It's not often that a game shakes me to the core. painting haunting pictures in my mind so vividly that it makes nightmares feel like exciting adventures. But in the case of the Void, also known as tension, we get treated to a dying world so sick, so twisted and strange that you can't help but live in fear of what it stands for. In the game, you play as an unknown entity that is awoken in a place called the Void, a purgatory-like liminal space full of dark and foreboding swamps or houses, along with creatures that defy all logic with multiple heads, limbs, and even minds. But most prominent of all of these are what are called the Brothers and Sisters, transcendental beings that along your journey try to sway you along specific paths, whether that be death and destruction or mending and clairvoyance. Constantly in your head or in front of your vision speaking to you, they ask you to accomplish certain tasks or solve puzzles. But during each of these sequences, it never is fully clear what is going on. All that you can work out is that you are trapped in this strange place, surrounded by souls that are neither in heaven nor hell, instead stuck drifting through the endless eternity of nothingness. And everywhere you look are the screams of a dead and forgotten world. Plant life has been stripped of color, a resource you can use in-game to progress, and even the houses you find yourself in are characterized by almost a haunted house feeling rather than anything cozy and familiar. A dark mist blankets most of the play space, and even walking through it makes you feel sick and depressed, looking into things you shouldn't, like Eve and the forbidden fruit of the Bible. And more than anything, the aspect of the Void that makes it such a special game is exactly this feeling it provides. Because despite how otherworldly and dead this place, or figment of our imagination is, it still tells a story all to its own. Like when you climb the massive branches of diseased trees trying to make your way to ethereal realms of existence, or stumbling upon an ancient tomb full of fire and walls that reach great heights. Each of these places tells the story of something grand happening there, of the Void being more than just our imagination, but rather a lesson. Why are there so many souls trapped here? What was it like before? Was there even a before? And also, who are we? Who are the brothers, the sisters? What is all of this trying to tell us? All of these hidden secrets make Tension one of the most philosophical games out there in a way, even in the absurdest fashion in which it's all approached. But once again, none of this would work as well as it does without the extremely atmospheric approach the game takes, of peeling back the layers to a ruined and irredeemable hellscape that is full of oppressive and dreamlike visions fraught with danger and shaped by the decisions we made as a player on our journey. In a lot of ways, the setting itself is a reflection of how we as the player and protagonist feel, so trapped and afraid of what is behind every corner, or of what we might uncover in our own minds should we carry on. Nothing in the Void really makes much sense at all, but that's also what makes it such a special experience, and also a key ingredient behind so many amazing games with dying worlds. Because a key aspect in any world that is dying is the disease that caused it to get there, whether that be a pathogen of our genome in the environment or one that stems from the very neurons in our brains. Dying worlds like these are special because in a way it's the best part of any world building out there. The decay that we find in the environment and how it speaks to us on a fundamental level about the horrors we can find in our own societies and minds, and how we might tackle them lest we succumb to the same fates. And in the case of games with worlds and so much despair it makes us worry about our very own getting close, nothing quite compares to the absolute horrors of the forgotten and strange world of the Void or Tension. I've always been a big fan of games with worlds that can at one moment be tranquil and soothing, and the next bombastic and exhilarating. Places that one second have you relaxed, and the next on the edge of your seat. And in terms of titles like this, few capture the feeling quite as well as Pacific Drive. Taking place in a fictional area called the Olympic Exclusion Zone, centered in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, the game begins with you driving into the sectioned off area in the forest, curious as to what you'll find, after which you are suddenly trapped in a paranormal nightmare with strange anomalies, haunting ghosts, and monsters stalking you. Early on in the disaster, you discover an old and beat up station wagon that seems to have a mind of its own, which you use to drive yourself to safety. The entire forest around you is obviously cursed, and along with this are a never-ending list of issues. Popped tires, broken windshields, or busted doorknobs, which all have to be directly interfaced with and fixed back at your garage in between each and every mission to find a way out. It's a fascinating gameplay loop centered all around this car with its own thoughts, and the setup is only made better by the setting. The deep and foreboding forests of the Pacific Northwest in their own right are terrifying, but even more so when you must drive through them late at night, with heavy rainfall berating your windshield as your wipers fight to stay alive and your headlights barely shine the path ahead in front of you. In order to survive, you must constantly jump out of your car and on foot scavenge for resources to upgrade your vehicle in order to progress further into the zone. And as you get closer and closer to the center, things only begin to get crazier and crazier, with a finale that will leave you awestruck. But truthfully, for me at least, the best part about this game comes from those slower moments, especially early on, just driving around this world. There are no other people around, barely any wildlife, and a strange calm and composure to it all that makes you feel like you have found yourself in a paradise, not hell. Like seeing the sun rise above a nearby mountain range and shine down upon you sitting alone in your car, trying to figure out things on a map. Or walking through homes and science facilities that have now been long abandoned, looking through files about what happened, or seeing dinner left on the table around a campfire, wondering what must have happened to this family in their final moments. Because clearly something terrible has happened in the exclusion zone, and while it is technically your main objective to figure out what, the real best moments are just taking it all in. With every turn of your wheels, with every rock you slide across, or dirt mound you plow through, you can hear the whines of the car being battered, or the screams of the engine trying to keep up. And throughout it all around you is nothing but the calming breeze, or light shafts piercing the tree lines to give you a sense of relief in what at times can feel like an endless jungle. In fact, about the only things you actually see throughout the game are anomalies, which consist of things like exploding and moving human dummies, electrical vortexes, or alien scavengers looking for parts, your car included. Seeing any of these on a rainy night will instantly get your adrenaline pumping, and especially considering how fast you will be moving in this game most of the time, any small mistakes can result in you falling hundreds of feet off a nearby cliff, or crashing into a tree and completely destroying all of your upgrades that you spent so much time to put on your car. It's by no means a game for the faint of heart, but if you give it a chance, it really allows you to get soaked up in the ambiance of it all. In fact, I remember one specific moment in my playthrough where I had parked my car with the headlights on nearby while I looked through a building for some materials I needed. And outside, I was suddenly struck by the sounds of thousands of little bugs outside making a fuss. And looking out into that deep forest, those roaring canyons, the open valleys, just felt right. I wasn't sure what was going on here, where everyone had gone, or what was coming next, but I was excited about it, to explore an adventure, to discover. And isn't that what games like this are all about? Figuring out how we belong in a world that is so hostile, so misunderstood, a place that is by all accounts barren and dying, but within this still is so full of beauty and intrigue. Whereas most games have towns with lots of NPCs, tons of quests to go on, or a story that goes from one set piece to the next, Pacific Drive instead is about those quieter moments of just looking at the world around us and appreciating what we do have while seeing just how haunting things have become. And being set in the Pacific Northwest makes the game so much better too. It's such a lonely backdrop on its own and lends to those feelings of isolation you get throughout each playthrough, constantly reminding you just how alone you are. It's the definition of a cozy yet stressful game that manages to perfectly grasp the nature of the sublime through dead and forgotten environments, not because of a lack of nature, but absurdly an abundance of it. Few games I've played reach the heights and intensity that are achieved within the first 5 minutes of picking up Underrail, and that's because it's one of the most hardcore games out there. For those of you who haven't played, it's essentially a love letter to the original isometric Fallout games of old, but somehow is even more difficult and overbearing. In the title, you get to select from a variety of builds and upgrades that you will have to painstakingly find throughout the game, all deep underground, surrounded by serial killers, sadistic warlords, and retro-futuristic sci-fi themes. A cataclysm of sorts has occurred far above you on the surface of this mysterious world, and has thrust humanity into deep caverns in the crust of the planet, in order to survive the inhospitable wasteland above. But down below, things don't fare much better. Because of the conditions and fall of humanity, everything is archaic and horrifying. Bartering for goods is a life or death affair, almost everywhere you go is covered in darkness, and if you step even 1 foot outside the confines of any major town, you will be swarmed by giant and irradiated fauna. This means every single moment you are playing the game is a calculated and nerve-wracking affair, deciding when to use precious weapons you have like grenades and when to cut your losses and run for your life. Each and every quest, enemy, or new zone requires your full attention and thinking outside the box in order to conquer. And because you cannot respec or take back any of the decisions you've made, it's exceptionally easy to quickly find yourself in a position where you're literally screwed and have to start the game over from the very beginning in order to progress. It's about as hardcore as games can get, probably a big reason this title never blew up like many other CRPGs that are now loved. But the reason it does have such a fanatic cult following is that once you learn how to play by the game's rules and succumb to the pain, you're retreated to one of the most fascinating dying worlds of all time. First and foremost, unlike many other games with forgotten and ruined worlds, the actual places where catastrophe first occurred in Underrail you never even get to see. Since you are now stuck underground years past whatever thrust humanity into the deep, you only get to use your imagination to assume what things must be like above. And considering what you are left with down below is so gruesome and fearsome, it's hard to see how anyone would have wanted to leave the surface. Poring over lore tombs in the underground point to hints like massive warfare, environmental collapse, and resource depletion, but others give hints of alien or interdimensional interference. And the underground itself is no slouch either, as behind every dark alley or desolate cave are not just monsters, but hints to the past of this world. For example, how did the animals and plant life deep underground grow so large or spawn strange mutations? Was genetic engineering going on at some point? Or what about the handful of shadowy organizations that have popped up in the chaos of the underground railways, and the oceans that stretch for miles beneath the sharpened stalactites above? It's a setting that is practically begging to be explored, and with each new area you uncover, only more questions come to mind. And behind all these questions too are societies on the brink of destruction, like shantytowns being controlled by gangsters and feral or cannibalistic outlaws. Sometimes you will even stumble upon people starving or in need of help deep in uncharted caves, or hear voices from beyond calling from ancient machinery whose purpose has been lost to the sands of time. You can feel in your soul the pain of every person, every location, every animal that you come across, and it gives you the impression that with each day, the world is simply fighting to survive. To survive in a place that might not even be worth living in, a situation quite literally in the depths of hell. Whereas a lot of dying worlds and games tend to focus on the serene qualities of nature left untouched, or the calming silence of a universe that has nothing to say, Underrail takes the opposite approach, and shows us a dying world consumed by rage, despair, and a distinct sense of hopelessness. It makes the game itself so depressing to play, but sometimes that's just the mood we are looking for, an escape into a world so sadistic and evil that we can't help but be thankful for the safety we have in our own lives by contrast. And maybe more than anything, it's another great example of why dying worlds and games are so special. They can teach us a lot about ourselves, fully immersing us in worlds that are so tragic they are hard to imagine, but yet still have a strange pull that we cannot escape, forcing us to dive deeply into the questions of how this existence became so lost. One of the best parts about dying worlds and games is that no two are quite the same. And that's because while the ideas of the death of a civilization or the loneliness of being the only living thing for miles on end are staples of the genre, how you get there and under what circumstances make all the difference. And maybe no game proves that point better than active worlds. You see, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a budding industry for massive online multiplayer experiences. Games like RuneScape, the original World of Warcraft, EverQuest, Second Life, and many more. Active Worlds was one of these original titles that released all the way back in 1995 and promised unrivaled social features and an entire game space made from the ground up to be controlled by the people, for the people. After creating and designing your own character, you were able to quite literally make buildings, open companies, or simply stand around and talk with others. The entire concept of the game itself revolved around the idea of a world that was completely created by other human beings in the digital space. It was a novel and fascinating idea for the time of the early internet, and meant that it gained a huge amount of popularity for a short amount of time in the late 1990s into the early 2000s. But you see, all great things come to an end, and after only a few short years, people started to abandon the universe of active worlds for new things. However, the world these players created, the ideas they spoke about, were all left behind in a sort of time capsule to a now distant part of our humanity. Walking around the currently active servers nowadays is like a trip down memory lane, full of wonky controls and dated 90s graphics. And even more unnerving is the aspect that no one else is there. You can walk for miles and miles along paved streets or backward forests full of art and writing from real human beings of the past, illusions of things that happened in pop culture, politics, or the economy of the time. It's a truly haunting experience because everywhere you go feels like it should be teeming with life, but instead is completely devoid of even a sound. Entire cities that sit dormant, waiting for the eventual return of citizens who have left forever, or the echoes of ghosts for the people that have long forgotten about this part of their past. In every wall or gleaming vision of nature in this game lies the heart and soul of real human beings that made the game what it was. The entire makeup and design itself formed because of the combined effort of so many people experiencing what the internet had to offer at the time. Which means more than most other games with dying worlds, Active Worlds truly encapsulates the solemn nature of it all. And in a way, it reminds me of going back to some of my old favorite games like Call of Duty, and playing alone in a multiplayer map I used to engage on in battles as a kid every day after school. Or returning to classics like World of Warcraft, and finding a quiet spot in that space you used to frequent in childhood and just sitting down and soaking in the sights. Games have a funny way of tapping into that solitary side in all of us that yearns for the nostalgia we can never get back. And unlike other media like books or television, it's not just the art itself which can teach us about the past, but how real people are affected by that art and speak through it into the future to us. Which means every step you take in Active Worlds isn't just an atmospheric dive into ancient civilizations or dead cultures, it's quite literally peering into the minds of people whose atoms eventually have created us. A haunting yet captivating thought that shows just how powerful dying and dead games can be as a conduit to our souls. Few games manage to have quite as a profound effect on us as Shadows of the Colossus. The original game was released in the early 2000s and was immediately met with roaring acclaim and love. It tells the story of a protagonist known as Wander, who is set out on a desperate quest to bring a girl named Mono back to life. In order to do so, Wander makes a pact with a mysterious and disembodied entity named Dorman, who is rumored to have the ability to resurrect the dead. But for Dorman to use this power, he tells Wander they must slay 16 colossi, massive and ancient beings that roam the land, each imbued with a fragment of Dorman's own essence. So you set out on a journey across massive, desolate landscapes, each with beautiful scenery, but a creepy lack of any life outside the colossi. Something unspeakable has occurred in these lands before, and now all that is left are what are supposed to be monsters. But with each Colossus that you kill, it becomes apparent that not everything is what meets the eye. Wander starts to gain darker features and an evil glow, as the lands around dead Colossi start to wither away and die, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Were these Colossus the protector of the land? And if so, where did everyone go? And as you continue your path of killing these hulking beasts wherever you find them, you eventually discover more and more of the world, including ancient structures and enormous valleys that dwarf you as the player character. The people that used to live here must have been especially impressive, and it's a wonder then how they even disappeared out of nowhere. And more than any other games with dying worlds, the one in Shadow of the Colossus is utterly breathtaking. This isn't a universe where death and decay are at the forefront, but rather calming ocean breezes, the sounds of nature, and green as far as the eye can see. If there was a tragedy in this world, it must have taken place long ago, and in its wake, all that is left is raw beauty and majestic monsters that reach into the heavens. And it makes actually playing the game such a calming experience, and it shows us that dying worlds can sometimes be the most awe-inspiring possible. However, as the story of the game progresses and more colossi are vanquished, it becomes clear that whatever we are doing is killing the world, and that Dorman may be on a path to great evil that will unlock potentially what destroyed this world before. It's not only a great, albeit obvious twist, but also a cool spin on the traditional dying world trope in games, where not only do we get to explore the aftermath of pain, but also become the catalyst for the next cycle. In an attempt to save the one we loved, we are actually dooming the future. And it's a perfect example of how dying worlds can even come about in the first place, and proves that even with good intentions, the greatness of humanity or the world can evaporate quickly. It really does make playing Shadow of the Colossus such a tragic experience when you realize what is actually happening, as in a way you are literally destroying everything that is beautiful that you've seen around you, or in other words, in a world that was already characterized by so much stillness and silence, you are paving a horrible future ahead. One of the most beautiful and tragic cases of a dying and forgotten world in a game of all time. Imagine waking up to find yourself in a world no longer recognizable, one filled with wires and electronic parts rather than open oceans and lush jungles. A world where humanity has vanished and left behind a struggling civilization of nothing but robots who must scavenge for survival. This is the world of Primordia, a small indie game that gave us a glimpse into a setting born of pure destruction, playing as beings that are not even human. As you walk through different areas in the game, all around you are advanced robotics, derelict spaceships, and completely deserted and dead environments. Long ago, humanity itself suffered an utterly catastrophic apocalypse that left all organic life vaporized into ash. And in this chaos, all that was left were the electronics and technology that were made before, where the sentient robots now had to fend for themselves instead of serving their masters. It opens up so many questions about existence, free will versus programming, and how to find meaning in a world where your creators are gone. But more than anything, it also gives us a glimpse into a world left in ruin by humans, where the pieces must now be picked up. Every single environment is full of dark color tones and depressing scenery, with literally all of the environment being nothing but rubble and barren wasteland, along with some robotic settlements and trading posts scattered around. It gives off an eerie warmness that is brutal and mellow, and really pulls you into every scene in the game. Computer terminals feel archaic and rusty, doors screech on their hinges, and the orange glow of each light post provides little illuminance. And it all results in a world that feels utterly broken, where all the robots are nothing more than garbage collectors that are finding parts of the old world to barely stay afloat. But within all of this is so much strong immersion too. These planets that before were organic now are completely mechanical, devoid of emotion and feelings. And as you progress through the story, you get to make a handful of choices that will affect how the narrative progresses, ultimately culminating with what will happen to you as the player character in the future. For me though, it's still that atmosphere that the game provides that is the strongest allure. A setting that reminds me some of other universes like Mad Max or The Matrix, but with its own twists and turns. Even the technology in the game is extremely fascinating to look into, as it proves that humans before must have been sufficiently advanced for space travel and buildings that reach miles into the sky, which makes their disappearance all that more fascinating, especially considering all robots were left in this place alone. This certainly isn't your usual apocalypse or Armageddon situation. Something very specific must have happened for the world of Primordia to end up how it is. Maybe humanity left to find a new home due to lacking resources and abandoned their robotic friends behind. Maybe an all-out war broke out that destroyed all organic life, or potentially the robots themselves rose up against their creators in the past, considering how sophisticated their minds are in present. Regardless though, Primordia gives us a glimpse into a future dying world now run by nothing but machines rather than men, and really makes you think not only about how things came to be, but if our own future may one day meet the same fate. There's something truly terrifying about being cold, surrounded by ice, snow, and the blackness of certain death as the rays of the sun are stamped out from the sky, coddled only by the clothes on our back that cast away frostbite and the numbing of our minds. Unlike all other forms of weather, the bitterness of cold makes us feel alone and afraid. Even those who succumb to harsh winters as their bodies shut down have been said to have a strange sense of euphoria in their final moments, stripping down to their bare skin to embrace the clutches of death in a crazed mania. And no game captures the essence of dying worlds from cold like this better than Frostpunk. Set in an alternative 19th century, you take the reins of a leader of a small group of survivors trying to stay alive in the frozen wasteland that is now Earth. Years ago, volcanic eruptions around the planet led to a cataclysmic winter unlike anything humanity has seen before. Crops died, infrastructure froze solid in place, and friends and families were torn apart as scavengers fought for the scraps they had left, resorting to cannibalism against the bodies of those who had already perished. The cold was so fierce that no amount of clothing could save us, and only the strongest of will were allowed to survive. As a leader of one of these band of survivors, you've been traveling for hundreds of miles through the endless abyss of snow and ice, looking for a massive cold generator that may just be your salvation. In both the first and second game, your survival revolves around finding heat sources just like this, and building entire civilizations around them in order to give humanity one last hope at a future that seemed to be so lost. And throughout each moment of your new people's reign, there is disaster. Spikes in the cold that can result in half the population dying, or riots in the street as to which politicians will lead your salvation in the years to come. So it's your task to figure out how to save everyone while keeping tempers low. No easy proposition, and one that will often see your entire playthrough culminating in failure. But more than just the interesting setup and jarring moment-to-moment gameplay, Frostpunk is a fascinating look into the depths of a truly cursed and dying world. A place that no matter how you spin it, is on its last legs, with so little hope left. And unlike many other similarly desolate worlds, the earth of Frostpunk is despicable even now. Rather than seeing the remains of humanity combed over by vegetation or erosion, instead the current times are even more pressing than the past. The cold is unrelenting, the pain is never-ending, and the depression burrows into each soul deeply. It truly feels like not only a world that has been cast into hell, but one that will never be able to dig itself out. And that aspect of the cold makes it all the more haunting. It's an environment where even the embrace of a loved one holding a warm blanket against your frozen skin does nothing to combat the shivers across your body. A dying world and setting in which you cannot escape. Everywhere you turn is nothing but the same biting grasp of winter, and crying faces stuck in place. For as scary as many other games with dying worlds are, there really is just something about the cold, so lonely, so depressing and devoid of feeling, that captures an essence unlike anything else. Because even in the happier moments of Frostpunk games, nothing ever gives us true relief. A dying world that is so fearsome, it kills our spirit as well. Whereas with most worlds that have collapsed or are collapsing, we find ourselves in more introspective moments wondering about our own lives and what parallels we can glean, in the stillness or cold of Frostpunk, there is nothing to think about but survival. A world so taken over by pain that only the human spirit can prevail. And a great reminder of just how relentless that human spirit is. That even in the depths of the deepest cold can lie a fire in our hearts that burns even brighter. Other dying worlds and games make you think or ponder on the questions of life. But Frostpunk reminds us that the only reason we get to think in the first place is because of the heroes and people amongst us who in the greatest times of peril rise above circumstance and overcome the unthinkable to forge a better tomorrow and bring life to a world from the ashes. There is a strange beauty in games with dying worlds that teach us that even in the worst of times, there is always hope. Always a dream within our souls that sings out despite the pain, begging to be unleashed on the world lest it falls away forever. Dying worlds are a constant reminder to all of us that we can never forget what makes us great, or focus on protecting the lives and future that we do have. Seeing ancient or grand civilizations fall to ruin, societies cast into apocalyptic scenarios, or monsters born of pure horror taking over what was once so beautiful. All of these circumstances speak to us on such a fundamental level because they're part of the human condition. They make us think about our own lives, or come up with stories in our heads about what must have been. Because you see, in our real lives, there are always cycles of destruction. The rise and fall of Rome, Greece, the Mongols, Persians, and every great civilization throughout time, including ours eventually. As human beings, we cannot escape the coming death of everything before us, our cultures, our lessons, and our people. And dying worlds give us a constant reminder that while the universe is infinite, all great things come to an end. And it's our job to carry on their legacy into the echoes of the future, to make sure the screams of the past never fall silent and the beacon of our times ahead shines brightly. But more than anything, these worlds are also a reminder that no matter what we face, we as people, as a universe, can overcome it and build something great once again. And as always, thanks for watching.